Hi there, my name is Jerry DeVore, and I want to first of all thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to not only tell you but show you why I'd be a great technical program manager for your company. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, well, why are we here? I think you guys know because you wrote the questions and the scenarios, but I did want to include them in the presentation just in case we needed to refer back to them at another time. So what does a good code coverage tool do? Well, it improves the reliability of embedded software, of course, provides metrics used to gauge the completeness of the software testing, does this by identifying which areas of source code in the application were exercised during a test, and of course it provides a convenient way to ensure that applications are not released with untested code, which we all know that would be bad. So the other coverage tools. So I analyzed four other tools. There were three at first, and they didn't really answer all my questions, so I pulled up a fourth one. And what I found that not all products map the functions that were exercised in the program back to the function point in the source code. I also noticed that most of them didn't require coverage at the assembly level in order to be certified. So that required additional verification, which ran into more time and more resources. And then finally, I also found that most of the products did not have all the reporting types that I would like to see, so they were very limited. So what would make our product stand out? Well, we should provide coverage for all the common levels, like statement coverage, branch coverage, and modified condition decision coverage, or MCDC as it's referred to. And then we should ensure that every function that is executed is mapped back to the function points in the source code. Also, our product tests parts of the system that are rarely or never accessed under normal conditions. We don't want to be normal. We don't want to be average. We want to be better than that. We want to find things that other folks didn't find. And then, of course, we want to offer as many reporting types as possible, including HTML, PDF, XML, JSON, text, etc., etc. My 3 monthly milestones for the first 3 months with ARIA. I think number one, and probably the most important, is make sure that I have a complete product inventory. I want to know what we have already, what exists, who's using it, what's good about it, what's not so good about it, those kinds of things. This would be done by creating a database of all products and services in all portfolios within my purview. If there's already one there, then I just need to look at it, review it, and kind of analyze it to see where we're at. Then I'd like to connect with all the customers, cross-functional business leaders, the engineering teams, the sales teams, executives, etc., and of course the program managers. So I do this by creating a contact list, making sure that everyone that I know of is on it, and then having a face-to-face or a Skype. Face-to-face might be a little bit difficult being around the world and around the country, but at least a Skype or a phone conversation with all managers and stakeholders of the products and services within my purview. And when that checklist is complete, I'm done. And then, of course, I also want to make contact with all cross-functional business leaders and executives. And again, that would be a checklist pulled from an org chart or whatever I can get my hands on that could help me identify those folks and then check them off as I go. And then, of course, I want to create and review a list of prospects. I want to know who's in the pipeline. And lastly, I want a list of all the current projects and programs that are underway. I want to know the statuses of those particular projects and programs and kind of identify where they're at. So moving on to program management performance measurement. I know you'd asked for one, and I hope I don't get docked for putting two on here, but I couldn't really decide which one was most important because I think they're both very, very important. For as far as productivity and performance, I think that's a pretty easy one. What we do is look at the initiatives that were completed per program manager per year or per month or per time frame, and then measure that against how many were assigned to them. And I think we ought to use percentages on that for obvious reasons. Some folks could have a bunch of little projects, but someone else might only have a few very, very large projects or programs. So our input would be the number of initiatives assigned to the program manager and the level of effort to include the schedule and budget. And the outputs would be the actual spend and actual productivity against those schedules and against that budget. Also, the number of initiatives completed and the number of initiatives completed on time and on budget. And then I like to capture also if there's any overtime or any borrowed resources from other projects or programs that help them complete these initiatives. And then customer satisfaction, the reason it's so important to me is because I really believe the program manager should be measured on how well their teams fulfill the customer needs. I mean, that's what we're here for. I want to make sure they're putting out a high quality product. So the inputs would be the number of customer service, and the outputs would be the customers satisfied with the product. Now, what I've used in the past and what has been successful in the past is you can't just do a survey, yes, no, and then some free-form text. It has to be quantifiable. So I've used customer satisfaction indexes before. They'll include customer surveys, but also a market share analysis and customer complaints and things of that nature, so that we can actually quantify our data. So we'd have a scale of 1 to 5. You know, how was the UI? Was it great being 5, not so great being 3, and horrible being 1? That kind of thing, just so we can quantify it. And the same with the service. We have to have a quantifiable measure. You know, how is our service on a specific piece of the product or the delivery on a scale of 1 to 5. And then I really think that it's telling if you ask the customer would they recommend or actually be a repeat customer of our service. I think that is really telling. And then at the bottom there we have just a basic quality bar. This particular one is measuring the KPI of completed on time and on budget. The yellow line is just the target, which is how many were assigned, and then the blue line is how many were actually completed on time and on budget. So the process flow that I use is represented here with this little flow chart, this end-to-end flow. It's pretty self-explanatory, but you know, we've already developed performance metrics, and then we want to measure those metrics, measure the performance against those metrics, obviously. And then what we'd like to do is identify improvement opportunities based on the measurements from those metrics. You know, gain an understanding. We'd like to obtain customer insights, peer insights, status reports. That's how we're going to gain an understanding of where there might be improvement opportunities. And then create the improvement plan. You know, we want to make sure we have a strategy for direction. We want to make sure we have a vision for change and improvement, training opportunities if necessary, and then also review the performance matrix. And then of course we want to monitor that. We want to monitor our improvement plan, make sure we're continually improving. It's obviously important that we don't stagnate. We want to make sure that we are continuing to improve and measuring our achievements against our goals. So the decision-making process, as I see it, you know, I basically use this 6-step framework. It's worked for me in the past, and I like to continue to use it in the future. Obviously, we want to identify the product or the solution. We want to make sure that we know the functionality and feasibility of the product and what's going to result from it. Number 2, we want to elicit the facts about the product and or solution. You know, I'm going to ask as many questions as I possibly can. I'm going to leverage many professional resources as I possibly can. I'm going to find out as much as I can about this product. You know, I understand that I'm not going to get all questions answered at all times. I'm not going to be able to obtain all the facts all the time due to constraints, either time constraints or other constraints. But when that happens, you know, I'm going to use my resources and critical thinking to be able to make predictions where facts may not have been available. Number 3, develop a possible alternatives to the investment. So I begin by making a list of the possible investment outcomes. Okay, what happens if I do? What happens if I don't? And then what I do is I like to use some creativity to think outside the box a little bit, to think of some alternatives that may not even yet exist. For example, do we have a product that's almost as effective or even more effective than the one being considered, that was that was shelved, or something like that? And can we produce something in-house that might be just as good or even better at a significant cost savings? And then I weigh these investment outcomes. Okay, I evaluate the alternatives and impact of the go, no-go decision to invest. And then I examine the feasibility, the risk, and the implications of each of those. And this is what I take into consideration. You know, what's the cost impact? What's the people impact? What's the operational impact? What additional information do I need? And then finally, what will happen if I do or do not decide to invest in this product or opportunity? And then I make the decision. You know, even though the choice may not be clear, there might be ambiguity, there might be time constraints, there might be other things, other factors involved. But at least I know that my decision is based on collaborative efforts with my team and other experienced professionals. I know that I've included everybody that I possibly can. I've I've leveraged every resource I possibly can. I know I have trustworthy information. I've done the critical analysis, and I've used sound judgment, and then I make the decision. And then, of course, I want to make sure I follow up on that decision. And I want to evaluate what happened. Obviously, I'm not just going to make the decision and forget about it. I want to really evaluate it and determine if it was the right decision to invest, or is there something I could have done better? Is there a problem with the decision that I made? And of course, I'm going to continually evaluate the process I used to make the decision. I don't think that we should ever, again, just stay stagnant. We want to see if there's any way we can improve pretty much everything we do, but in this particular case, the process we use to make this decision, and then of course identify any of the improvements that should or can be made. So, what's the best way for us to track all of our projects and all of our programs within our portfolio? I like to use this particular graph and spreadsheet. You've probably seen one similar to it or just like it. And what I like to see the most is I just like to see how many projects are up there. I can see at a very high level what the portfolio budget is and things like that. Project names, the summary, that kind of thing. But what I really want to see is the status when I'm pulling this up at first. I want to see what's red, what's yellow. And then I'm going to do a deeper dive into the reds and the yellows and find out why they're behind schedule or why they're at risk. And I also like to look at the green, which obviously are the on-schedule projects, so that I can maybe utilize some of the things that are being done successfully over there with some of the projects that may be struggling a little bit. And then the blue is just projects that are on hold or projects that might have been deferred or at a lower priority, but I still like to keep visibility of them, so that's what the blue is for. And then the next slide obviously is just an individual report, and what I want to see on this, other than the usual, project name, project number, project manager, that kind of, or program manager, that kind of thing, is I want to see the current milestone they're working on, the date that it needs to be completed, and then also I want to see the next milestone that is to begin, and I want to compare those two to make sure that they match up. And then the Foursquare at the bottom is just your typical Foursquare accomplishments this week, activities for next week. Are there any impediments in the bottom left corner there? And then what are the risks, and if there are any risks. And then I'd like to add to that, I probably should have put it on the slide, but what I'd like to see is not just the risks listed, but I'd also like to see a mitigation plan for those risks. All right, so misalignment management. In this particular case, the misalignment is between the product team and the engineering team, and we all know this is not uncommon. It happens a lot, but I found that most of the time it happens when there's ambiguity around which team owns which element of the decision to include certain features in a product or in the building of a new product. Even though it's a collaborative effort, one team or ultimately one manager needs to own the particular elements of that decision. So I define the product team as the one who defines and develops the roadmap that determines why features should be included in a new product or in a release of an existing product. And this is at a high level, not a technical level. And the product team is usually determining why certain features should or must be included. And much of this is determined by the direct communication with the stakeholders. So they're the ones talking directly with the stakeholders, and they're telling them what's important, how it should be prioritized, those types of things. And then the engineering team defines and develops how the feature will be included in the product design or release of the existing product. Now, this is at a technical level, not a feature level. This team understands the difficulty in including certain features, how it interacts with existing features, and what are the ramifications of including this feature at this particular time. So they're on the technical side. And then both sides, and this is where the challenge comes up, is they're both involved with the what will be included and then when it'll be included. And there's a good reason for that. The product manager is typically driving the prioritization of features based on the business needs, whereas the technical side, they're looking at the technical strengths and difficulties of including that feature. Are they, is it going to compete with another feature? Is it going to reduce performance exponentially? Those kinds of things. So the solution is, as I said earlier, I think you just need to clearly define the roles and then make sure that each of them knows what the other one's going through. They understand why the other one came up with the decision that they came up with. And I think there needs to be a bit of humility in there. I'm not always right. You're not always right. You need to accept that somebody might have a better idea, or at least understand where they're coming from. And I do this by ensuring the following are met. And I have some bullet points there. I want to establish a policy and process to follow to make sure that neither of the two teams are stepping over into the other's domain. No, that's easier said than done, but it can be done. Emphasize that making decisions in a vacuum is completely unacceptable. We need to communicate with each other. There needs to be a collaborative effort. We need to make sure that the other knows why we're making the decisions that we're making sometimes. And then we want to make sure that the engineering team doesn't try to tell the product team what's important. Well, that's more important than this. The business decides that for the most part. And then the product team, on the other hand, doesn't try to tell the engineering team how to do their job. And I think most importantly, there's got to be a culture of trust. Each knows that the other doesn't have a hidden agenda. Everyone's making decisions based on what's best for the organization, not what's best for themselves. And I think once you develop that trust and you understand that neither is putting themselves ahead of the good of the organization, I think that or actually the customer too, I think that leads to and breeds success. Okay, so that wraps up this presentation. I want to sincerely thank you for the time that you've taken out of your business schedule to watch this. I hope I was able to answer the questions and address these scenarios in a way that will help you evaluate my qualifications. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and certainly the happiest of holidays for you and your families. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.